Right, so hello everyone. Welcome to the Brisbane Infrastructure and Infrastructure DevOps User Group for October 2020. Yeah, wow, another month, but still getting there, and I think we're doing awesome. Alrighty, yeah. Anyway, so huge shout out to new people. So I can see there's a couple of new people in chat. So massive g'day, and hope you stick around. And yeah, don't be afraid to hang around and ask questions and get to meet everyone. We've got a pretty cool group here, as you can see. People want to play Among Us, so I think that'll be a fun that'll be fun to play. Anyway, so let's get stuck into it. So quickly talk about our sponsorship. We have one of our sponsors, which is Hudson Technology at Pablo at Hudson Technology. So he sponsors us. They usually provide catering, and they also provide a room to actually engage in. So think recruitment, think Hudson. Following that, we obviously have amazing ScriptRunner. So we've obviously our talk tonight is on ScriptRunner. So a huge thank you to Haiku for sponsoring ScriptRunner and paying the meetup costs. And yeah, again, if you're thinking about having a PowerShell solution, think ScriptRunner. And then finally, we have Insync Technology. And Insync Technology, which is where I work, essentially provide just basically catering costs and other little costs here and there that basically allow us to have an awesome user group. So, and then obviously think Insync if you want to have managed Azure services and Azure 365 products. All right, let's continue to move on. So we're going to quickly talk about the news. Fair bit happened. Actually, not really much happened, but there's a fair bit of drama that's happened recently in the news. Obviously, if you guys haven't been following the Slack, or I know that there's a few people who've been following in the PowerShell community, that Chef was acquired by Progress for $220 million US. A lot of, so there's a bit of interesting things that are happening there at the moment. I'm not going to particularly comment too much about it, but that's just something that's probably going to be, if you are using Chef, that's just something to keep at the back of your mind and see what kind of future the product holds, whether they continue to develop it or whether they actually are going to completely change it. Who knows? Next thing we're going to talk about a little bit about is PowerShell DSC. So a couple of new things with PowerShell DSC. First thing is I actually personally need to start engaging a little bit more on the community calls so I can get across a lot more of the content. But the other things are basically, so there's new resource modules being released for the SQL Server DSC, X Database, and GIA, or Just Enough Administration DSC resource modules. So those are being updated. The second thing which we want to quickly talk about is Steve Lee's proposal for DSC moving forward. So there's a couple of things that are really important for you guys to kind of make sure you're not necessarily across, but at least having a read of the GitHub issue, the GitHub PowerShell issue there will provide a lot more context to what I'm going to be talking about tonight. So the big thing with DSC is they're wanting to be able to actually make it work cross-platform and on new distros. So all the new distros are being moved to OpenSSL 1.1, which is no longer compatible with version 1.0, and they're also wanting to move away with the MOF schema. So this means that you only get support for DSC resources written as PowerShell scripts. So that's your get, set, test functions or PowerShell classes. PowerShell classes don't require a MOF schema, but many DSC resources are script resources. So we'll need to move to something other than a MOF to describe the schema of the resource. And so the current proposal right now is to use JSON instead of a MOF. And then finally, the configuration management. So Windows PowerShell LCM won't be available on PowerShell 7. New resources won't be new resources written won't be compatible with Windows PowerShell. Any existing resources with WMI or LMI base or have a MOF schema won't be supported. So a little bit of stuff going on there, but that's basically what's been announced by within the community call. So what's happening with PowerShell going forward. I really encourage you guys, if you want to go and have a look at that, I'll paste the link in the chat right now. You can go and have a look at the GitHub issue and just have a bit more of an understanding of what's going on. You can also just Google the DSC community calls, and they'll provide you a little bit more information about what's actually going on there as well. So definitely recommend checking out those resources. And yeah, if you want further information. The next thing is obviously PowerShell Conference Book Volume 3 is out. Obviously, it's 100% complete. We have our esteemed author Jordan here, who wrote an amazing chapter. And then obviously there's a whole bunch of other people. So if you're not aware of what the PowerShell Conference Book is about, it's basically a community-driven project where we get PowerShell people from around the world to basically submit chapters on various topics. Those topics are widely ranging but they're mainly limited to the DevOps, IT Ops kind of PowerShell space. Lots of cool stuff. Lots of cool chapters and stuff that are literally in there. And so essentially all the money that's raised actually goes to the DevOps Collective, which are the guys that run the PowerShell Summit. And that basically, that money goes to the on-ramp program, which essentially provides scholarships for people to kind of get started into PowerShell. So really good cause, yeah, really good content. So it's not light reading, it's effectively a textbook. It's supposed to be a conference and a book. So yeah, definitely recommend checking it out if you're wanting to level up your PowerShell skills. On to the next slide quickly. So starting to think about I said call for speakers 2020. I'm going to just quickly change that because that should be 2021. So effectively, we are pretty much ready for 2021. And what we've been doing is we've been going through and looking at our speaker schedule for 2021, make sure that we've got tons and tons of content available. And I am filling up spots. So I know that we do have a whole bunch of tentative speakers lined up at the moment. So if you're interested, just let me know. Let me know of the topic that you want to talk about, and then we can go from there. So right now, I know that this is just kind of a rough schedule. February, we have a talk by Gilbert on log analytics and Custo. Then on March, potentially, again, I haven't even mentioned this with Wayne, Wayne might give a talk on Docker. April, we'll probably have a talk from Joshua King. May and June are available. I will do a talk in July. I'll probably be talking a little bit about web scraping. That's what I'm probably going to talk about. I'm not sure yet. And then we also potentially have a talk by Stevie over at Chocolatey. So he'll be able to give us some cool demos on Chocolatey. So I think, and so next month, I haven't officially confirmed it yet. So, but next month is going to be either us playing Among Us or we're going to have a very, very special presentation. I'm going to keep it fairly under wraps for the time being, but all I can say is it's a very, very cool person, potentially be able to actually give us a talk. Yeah, I don't know, Wayne. What else should I mention? That kind of.
I think that's enough.
Yeah, I think that's enough. Yeah, he's a very well known person
Yeah.
that might be able to give a talk for us. So I will formally announce it once I can actually get a little bit more information. But next month is either going to be us playing Among Us or and Wayne practicing his interrogation skills, or it will be a very special guest that will come and give a talk. So that is it for me. So I'm going to now hand over the reins over to our esteemed guest today and our awesome sponsor, Haiku.
All right. Thanks, Michael. Yeah, I think a few weeks ago you just asked me, if I could do another talk about ScriptRunner and also talk about a little bit the things that have changed since, I think it was around more or less the same time, I think last year, when I showed you a little bit around so what ScriptRunner is all about and what we're doing, stuff like that. So what I want to do today is really, again, to talk about what we're doing in general, and then also talk about what we have done since last year in the development space, and just to make sure that you got all the info and you know what we're doing. And also gonna have some little bit of a sneak peek in what we're gonna have pretty soon, because we're working on a new user interface and new possibilities. So I want to share this as well. And so sharing is the thing. So I'm trying to share my screen. Just a second. So we can actually look at something. That makes sense, I guess. Okay, so I have, for the beginning, I have a few slides, and then I'm gonna switch to my environment, and I'm gonna just go through what we're doing, why we're doing it, and if you have questions, please ask. I'll try to answer them. So you can ask me anything. I hope I can also answer it. We'll see. All right. So yeah, what is ScriptRunner? We're a company. We are based in Europe. We're based in Germany. So over here, it's just I just had my breakfast, so it's still pretty early over here, which is cool. So yeah, what we're doing. So we are in the space of PowerShell management, and what does that mean? I will cover in throughout the demo and the presentation. Yeah, we're a bunch of around 20 people. So that's me. So you can contact me on all usual channels: Twitter, LinkedIn, and so what? Yeah, and of course, yeah, we also have a nice PowerShell cheat sheet that you can put on your office wall or your home office wall, which is more appropriate these days. So you can just go there on our website, and we ship it almost all over the globe. And it shows you, we hear all the time, it's really a great help for people, no matter if they're where they are in their PowerShell journey, if they want to look up things like you know how the AD PowerShell module works, or how about pipeline and stuff like that. So it's always a cool thing that you can get here, and that helps you. The other thing that we just recently published is a PowerShell security ebook, which got produced together with the guys from Windows Pro and for SysOps, which you might know as a portal for IT Pro content quite a lot. And this is a very in-depth ebook. It's about 140 pages, I think, and so it covers all the built-in security options in PowerShell, including GIA and stuff like that. And so it's really also helpful. So you might want to take a look at this as well. So even if you're maybe thinking, what is ScriptRunner? But you might still want to have and get this ebook here. All right, so ScriptRunner, PowerShell management. So what does that mean? So the idea of ScriptRunner is to, as we say, make PowerShell a real solution. And so what does that mean? So that means if you guys, you're writing PowerShell scripts all day long, you know how it works, you have the permissions to do things in your backend systems, no matter if it's on premise, if it's in the cloud or hybrid or whatever. And so the idea of ScriptRunner is to take all that great stuff that you do and make it accessible to people outside of the, let's say, PowerShell expert circle. Why? Just to be able to take this great technology and really make it usable throughout your whole organization, maybe even. And so what we're looking at is, so what are the challenges with PowerShell? So obviously, as I said, it's something, if you're familiar with it, if you're working with it day to day, it's great. It's absolutely awesome. As I said, if you know how to use it, if you have the permissions and the time to write the scripts and stuff like that. If you're thinking about delegating this execution of scripts, I mean, there are technical solutions working with Gia and stuff like that. But in general, it's pretty difficult, not impossible, but maybe difficult to really to say, okay, I have a script for spinning up new VMs in Azure, or to creating reports about my Office 65 tenant, and I would like to get that to people in helpdesk so they can run it, but I don't want to train them how PowerShell works. I would definitely not give them backend permissions in my tenants, in my Azure VMware environment or whatever. And so one of the reasons why that is really difficult is there is no centralized management for all the different bits and pieces that you need in order to run the script, the credentials, maybe library scripts and all that. And so what happens if you look at how PowerShell is typically used in many organizations? It's like it's because it's the tool, the technology for the IT expert is still, even if you have all the scripts, it's still the IT pros that are running these scripts. So people knocking at the door from service desk, end users, could you please do this? Could you please do that? And you're running the script. So the idea of ScriptRunner is to have a nice way, an easy to use way, and a secure way to take that stuff and make it accessible for other people outside of the IT pros and the people that are really very deep into PowerShell. And the key for that is, for us, is centralization. And that's because we want to make sure that everybody who is, let's say, spinning up a new VM or starting an onboarding, offboarding process or creating new teams, whatever, it always happens the same way. So all the people always work with the same kind of script, the latest version of the script. So no worries about where's the script, is it in one email or one network share, whatever. So it's about really standardizing the process. So no matter if it's user A or B, running the script or fulfilling a task, basically, it's always happening the same way with the right scripts. So that also means using the scripts together. It also means developing the scripts together in team or even multiple teams. And that also means, of course, you want to have some kind of monitoring. So to make sure you know what script ran at what time, how long did it take, was there an issue, was there an issue to connect to the backend system and stuff like that. So really have the control panel about all the activities. And that also, of course, relates to security, which means that on the one hand, you need to have a secure way to handle and to manage all the credentials that we need for the PowerShell script to connect to Azure Office 65 and so on. And on the other hand, to make sure that if I want to enable somebody to run a script for spinning up a VM or whatever, that I don't have to make this person backend admin in my vSphere environment, in my Azure environment. So these are the aspects that really are necessary to then really think about delegation of that particular task, so these people can basically get their job done. And besides this of course, manual approach, somebody is starting a script to do something. It's also about enabling other third-party systems to make use of that and trigger actions with the right parameters, with the right parameter values. So it's and we will see that there are three ways when we look at ScriptRunner to run scripts. One is manually, somebody starts it by clicking on a tile in the web user interface. I will show you. The second one is the scheduled approach typically for housekeeping processes. And the third one is then really having systems like, I don't know, ServiceNow, SharePoint workflows, SAP, to be able to trigger actions. For example, if there is an onboarding process where everything goes on maybe in the HR module of SAP from the organizational perspective, and then once somebody has approved, okay, that's the new user, the new employee, and that's the manager, and that's the address and stuff like that. And so once that's all approved, then somebody says, okay, now we can actually create that user chain and add the user to members and create team channels and whatever. And so that's then when this connection where we basically talk about the REST API, where any sort of system that is able to talk REST can then also make use of that triggering scripts in the background in a secure way, in a well-managed way. And the way we achieve that is we're starting with centralizing the PowerShell scripts and the modules. So they are all hosted on the ScriptRunner server. And so that's the starting point, having all the, of course, that means also that you can synchronize scripts, for example, from Git to ScriptRunner. So when you have your CI/CD pipeline, the script is being tested, and then it goes to the production branch, and then we can have typically a scheduled action that says, okay, if there's a new script or an updated script in this production branch, we automatically make it available for delegation and automation in ScriptRunner. The second step is managing the credentials in a secure way, which means when we talk about how ScriptRunner works and how the scripts are executed, the only instance that's actually running the script is ScriptRunner. So ScriptRunner needs to have the scripts, needs to have the credentials, and needs to have the connection to the backend system, no matter if it's on the cloud or premise, whatever. So the only instance that really runs the script is the ScriptRunner server. That's why we call it here the execution proxy. On the other hand, if we think about delegation, so let's say this could be somebody in helpdesk or maybe somebody in HR that should be able to enable an out of office when somebody calls in sick, for example. This person is only talking to ScriptRunner. So number one, they don't need to have any access to the actual backend system, and they don't need to have the permissions in this backend system because the delegation is managed within ScriptRunner. So in ScriptRunner, you decide if this user and what kind of tasks they are able to fulfill. Again, Azure, Office 365, SharePoint, whatever. And so having this separated between, okay, somebody is triggering an action and actually executing the script, which happens by the ScriptRunner, enables this secure way of really delegating the execution. And because we're talking about people that are typically not into PowerShell or in command lines and whatever, it has to be easy. So what we're doing is we are taking the PowerShell scripts, we're taking the information from the PowerShell scripts and automatically transform them into a web user interface, which means we look at the synopsis to hopefully find some parameter descriptions, because that becomes part of the user interface. And we look, of course, we look at the parent block to see what kind of parameters we have, string, date, time, or whatever. Based on that, we automatically create this user interface. Here we see an example of one of this, and we'll show you that when we switch to the demo. And the nice thing about that is that, number one, we automatically create that user interface, so you don't have to write any additional code. And the other thing is that you can control what you're actually going to show to the user. So in this case, it's the new team command that which of course has dozens of parameters, but here in this case the decision was made that we only display 3 parameters that really need the attention of the user, which is name of a team, the description, and who are the members of this team. All the other parameters are still configured in the background, like, okay, how you want to handle Giphies, or should they be allowed to, should it be public teams or channels or private channels and stuff like that. That all can be pre-configured, and it's still there. It's still being used by ScriptRunner when we actually execute a script, but it's nothing that we have to bother the user about, because it's only just really the things that the user might need to select or type in something or whatever, and that really makes it very easy for these people without maybe even knowing that in the background there is some PowerShell magic going on. And on the other hand, it gives you the possibility to manage what these users are actually able to see, which also means typically it's really very, very straightforward, very easy for these people to work with. And so what we see here is an example of what we call the Delegate app. So each tile that you see here represents a use case, which of course underneath is a PowerShell script. So depending on what you delegate in and configure in ScriptRunner, a person might see like this number of tiles, or maybe just 1 or 2. There might be you might have maybe some self-service use cases where somebody maybe has only one tile or whatever. So that really depends on what kind of task these people should be able to fulfill. And of course, because we're talking about this delegation based on groups and stuff like that, of course, so one person or one group of people could see 5 actions, other maybe 20 or whatever. And then we have these tabs over here that, depending on the backend systems or the way you want to structure the scripts, you have kind of categorizing these actions as well. And additionally, as I mentioned before, there is one thing is we have the user interaction where somebody is triggering the execution of scripts, and the other way here tries to show that there can be any kind of system that triggers the execution of scripts. We have, for example, monitoring systems. We're partnering with PIDG. That might be maybe familiar with you, where there are some sensors, and if they detect an error on a system, and the solution to solve the issue is maybe to restart a service or maybe to enhance a VM and stuff like that, then PIDG triggers the execution, tells us this is the script to run, these are the parameters, and then we do that, and we of course get feedback to that third-party system, and then you have this real integration of all the PowerShell stuff. So not just trigger it manual and schedule, but really having an event-driven approach where you can just take any kind of system that talks REST. And even if that's not the case, we also have something what we call the email inbound connector. So for legacy systems that cannot talk REST, but they can send out email and with an information that tells us, like, more or less the same information. What is the name of the script or the action? What are the parameters? Then this is something that can happen as well. Okay, so with this, I'm going to switch to my demo environment. Are there any questions so far?
I have a few, but I'll probably wait until the end of the thing before asking them, if that's all right.
Okay. Yeah, of course. Maybe I ask them on the way. Who knows?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So, all right. So here we are in the admin app of ScriptRunner. So as I said, so here we have all that scripts that we can use. It's 1,000 something scripts. As you might see, we also detect if a script contains functions, which is quite interesting because later on you can decide if you only want to delegate a particular function or use a function, or maybe a full script, for example. We heavily work here with tagging, which in this case basically starts with the name of folder. So what we have underneath, if I'm going down here on the folder structure, so here we have a folder structure that actually is monitored by the ScriptRunner service that runs on this machine. And every new script, or if there is a modification in the script, we detect, and then we show it here in that list, which also means if I'm adding a new folder, then this folder automatically becomes a tag, which is quite helpful, which also means that it definitely makes sense in the beginning to think about what structure here makes sense. And even if you have like subfolders, each folder becomes a tag as well. So if I'm looking for something, maybe MS Teams, we can see that it has multiple tags because it's in the folder Office 65, MS Teams, in this case, policies, for example. And that later on also is being used by default when we start delegating. So this MS Teams, for example, becomes automatically a tab for the user to see, okay, these are all my Teams actions. These are all my Azure actions, for example. And of course, as I said, you can synchronize that with for example, with Git. So what I'm doing here, I'm just showing that quickly, and we're coming back to this part later on. But just to give you an idea about what happens here is that, for example, here I have a action that runs, I think, every hour in this case. Yeah. And what it does, it actually looks into in my GitHub repo into the production branch and automatically downloads it to the folder that I want to have that scripts being stored. So this is how you can integrate. What you see here is the only thing that we need here is we have the Git client on that machine. And so this is how you can take scripts from all kinds of places. And by the way, so most of these scripts are coming from our own GitHub repo, which we call action packs. So if you go to github.com/scriptrunner, GitHammer, no, so not that, action packs. Here you find hundreds of scripts for many different platforms, many different use cases, and depending on your PowerShell journey, that might be interesting to maybe just look at how the scripts look like, and also maybe it might give you some inspiration of like, okay, what things are also possible with PowerShell that you might have not thought about maybe. And what you also see, and I will cover that also later on, is that we also bring some additional variables here into the picture, which helps us to control, for example, what we display to the user once we have executed script. And I will come back to that later on. So we're talking about basic PowerShell plus some additional functionality that we add to the picture that helps us to manage and helps the customers to manage how maybe script should work, and also what kind of information we want to show to the users. So this is step one. We need to have the scripts. Step two is credentials. So we need to have credentials, of course, to connect to our backend systems once we run the script. And we have two ways of actually storing credentials in general. One is storing it in the local Windows credential store, which, for example, happens with this credential here. But the other way is we support password servers. At the moment, we have 3 of them: Pleasant, CyberArk, and Psychotic. So in this case, means if later on, if I have a script that tries to connect to Exchange, ScriptRunner is going to ask the Pleasant, in my case, it's a local Pleasant server, to get this credential based on the ID of that credential that I have stored in that Pleasant machine. Also coming back to what is new since I talked about ScriptRunner last year. One thing that we added, which I'm not sure if it was there when I did the presentation, is the concept of having multiple teams inside of ScriptRunner. So the idea here is, if you create a new script or a credential, and you might have multiple people in your organization working with this admin app, and you might have a team that is responsible for all the Azure stuff, and then you have a team that's also responsible for the Exchange stuff, and you don't want the Azure guys to be able to mess around with the Exchange credentials and Exchange scripts and stuff like that. What you can do here is then you can say, okay, instead of having it public use, which means everybody who is able to connect to the admin app sees that, you could say, okay, the Azure team is only seeing, number one, the stuff that is public, plus only their own scripts, their own credentials, all actions, what we see later on. So that helps you to kind of have a kind of separation between multiple teams if you want to make sure that these teams are not having access to each other's scripts, credentials, and all that. So what we see here as well is, and this is, which is pretty new, is that, and that's because we are now supporting PowerShell 7, is that you can, of course, have your SSH keys being managed and being part of the configuration, which can happen in 2 ways. You can have a pass to the SSH key file, or you could pass the content of this SSH file here into a ScriptRunner, because that's later on is then being used when we use PowerShell against Linux or Mac OS. But you also might see, but it's still grayed out here in my environment, we are working on a version to support PowerShell secrets management, which is a pretty cool thing, because in combination with that, of course, then we will also support, for example, it will be able to use Azure Key Vault, for example. But that's still, as you can see here, still experimental. But it's something that will be available pretty soon. What you can already use, of course, based on PowerShell 7, is the use of SSH keys, of course. All right. So this is the thing that we have with the credentials. And again, of course, also the credentials get these tagging mechanisms, which later on might be useful. For example, maybe not just working with this search, which works with, in this case, the credential. But what you can also do is you can work with a global filter, which says no matter if I'm in scripts or credentials or other areas of the solution, I only see all the objects that have the tag Azure, which is great. If in this case, if all objects that are working or combined or mapped to Azure actually have the script, have the tag, then it's really cool. Otherwise, you might wonder, I'm having the filter here, but I'm missing a credential, and that then might be because this credential doesn't have the Azure tag. But so it helps if you have kind of a real good guideline of how to organize all that bits and pieces within ScriptRunner. All right. Third step is we have targets, and targets are the actual backend system that we want to talk to with our PowerShell scripts. So we basically have a number of target types, which follows the thing that you can do natively with PowerShell. So you can have local execution, you can have PowerShell remoting, you can combine different targets into a collection, which helps for housekeeping process. For example, if you want to do things on 60, 70 different services or servers or whatever, then you can just put them together in a collection, and you can decide if you want to execute that on multiple targets in parallel, or should that happen in sequence, and what should happen if one target has an issue and is not answering. Should we stop the whole process, or should we just skip this particular target? Then we have the obvious Azure and Office 365 targets, where we already also have some new things being implemented since my talk last year. And what happens with the target is you decide, okay, what kind of backend system I want to talk to. So in this case, if it's Office 365, I would select my account here to connect. And in other cases, for example, for Exchange, it's going to be if it's a local Exchange, it's going to be the FQDN or the IP address of the Exchange server, and then it's the credential that is being used, which means later on, whenever I have an action that is trying to connect to this backend system, it uses this credential for the first connection. We also can take a look at the example where you have maybe multiple credentials, because you might have a script that starts with Active Directory, goes to Exchange, and then maybe to SharePoint, and then to Teams. You can always use the same securely managed credentials here within ScriptRunner, also in other combinations, so to speak. All right. So, and here we have the different services that you might want to address. And what's new since the last ScriptRunner edition is that we now also support the XOV2 certificate-based or modern authentication for Exchange Online. And as Microsoft is moving towards this more and more, we will see additional target types or services that are supported in that way. We still have also the good old Exchange Online inside of that target. And so what really is important here is that now you can also have this modern authentication for Exchange Online. We also added Microsoft Teams. That was not there last year. You could, of course, still do it, and I will show you. Of course, for all other services that we don't have here. Like if you would like to connect to AWS, you could go for a generic cloud service, or you can have, of course, a library script that does the connection to a backend system and the disconnection, and combining all that within the configuration here. If we look at the remoting part, which is also new now, of course, now we have the SSH here as well as an option. Again, of course, thanks to PowerShell 7. We also added the Hyper-V Direct target type here, and I think the container is also also new there in that configuration type. So we have the scripts, we have the credentials, we have the targets, and with this you can say, okay, now I can create what we call an action. An action is kind of the use case. What do you want to achieve? What is the main goal of a script like this one here, creating a new team, for example? So this action kind of brings all that bits and pieces together: the scripts, the credentials, the targets, maybe also the delegation, and other bits and pieces. So which means if I'm looking at the details of this action here, when I click down here, I can see all that different objects that make that action what it is, which is, okay, it's about creating a new team. It is using this target for O65. It's going to use this credential. That's my main script. And here I have, and that's another example of using multiple credentials, because this is an example which has been created before we had that Microsoft Teams directly in the target. What happens here is that I have a library script that actually handles the connection to Teams and the disconnection after the execution, and that's also being combined with a credential. Okay, what is this person talking about? So maybe we can just try to run that action. And so what we see here is, this is, as I mentioned earlier on, this is how we take the information from the script and automatically create this input form. So we have information from the synopsis, which here we have the description. I already played around with it a little bit. We have mandatory parameters, and then we have all kinds of parameters that would now, in this case, is relevant for creating a new team. Now, what we typically want to do is, we don't want to run this and delegate this kind of action, because it's going to look like this, right? The user has to scroll down and through all the parameters and stuff like that. What we actually want to do is that all the configuration and all the parts here that we want to have, because based on our Teams governance, we want to pre-configure. And then what we typically do, and I want to show you an example where this already happened, is this one here. So what happens here is, if I'm running that and I'm still in the admin mode, so I'm just going to switch to a helpdesk person pretty soon. So what we see here is that instead of all the parameters, we only see these three, which says, okay, you have to type in the display name, maybe description, and then here you can select the members of that team, and then you say hit run, and then what happens in the background is, now ScriptRunner executes the script. You can follow and look at in real time what actually happens here. So here is an example, like, okay, you can see this is the user, this is the use case, these are the parameters. So here we see the ones that I've put in manually, and also the ones that have been pre-configured and being used for the execution of that script. And now we can still let that run in the background. And so this would be then typically the case where you say, okay, this is something I want to delegate to somebody in helpdesk, for example. So I can take this action. I've tested it. It's okay. It does what it should do. And now I can say, okay, I want to delegate that to a person or a group of people. I can choose kind of color schemes, which sometimes helps people who are not working with that frequently, saying, okay, I know all my Teams actions are green, all my Azure actions are blue, and stuff like that. And so I can take that and delegate that. And now if I'm switching the role, so to speak, and I'm going to my helpdesk user, which is this user Tina over here. So this is a delegate app. So this is the web interface for people who kind of consuming what I've configured. They're consuming my actions. They're consuming the scripts that I have created. And so here we have that same action that we just saw. And if we take a look at this, it's even more simplified because we don't see the parameter names, which is not necessary for this user typically. But we have the same input fields, of course. And again, okay, I'm going to just select whatever user I have here. I click on run. And now the same thing happens. ScriptRunner takes the information, executes the script as the execution proxy for all that information, and creates that team in the background. Now, because we talked about having this monitoring and this control panel kind of thing, I can take a look at the dashboard, and I can see what happens in the background. Like in this case, I have this user Tina. Now it's not administrator anymore. It's this user Tina actually executing or triggering that execution. And so I can follow and can see what happens here. If I can also say I only want to see the things that went wrong, so I can investigate what happened here, what kind of issue we had. And as I said, we have 3 ways of actually executing the scripts: manually, scheduled, and based on the REST API. All that information is ending up here and can be analyzed in the dashboard. So here I have a mix of, these are things that happened based on the scheduler, ScriptRunner. This is something that happened manually by a user. So I can take all that information and I can get into the detailed reports. I can also take a look at multiple actions and results to kind of combine and analyze what happens there, to find out if there has been some differences between executing it now and 1 hour ago, for example. So all this information is here. You can also make a drill down saying, I only want to have the information about a particular target, Office 65, or I only want to have information about what happened with a particular, I don't know, exchange, maybe an exchange action, something like this. And then I can just make that drill down here and get that info. So that really gives me all that detailed info about the activities when it comes to using PowerShell. And as we have this user interface, now here is an example. This is what we call a result message, and this is, as you can see, it's just plain text, and something that we changed with the release of I think it was in April. You can now also have, of course, all kinds of HTML reports. Which means, and I think I have an example here. Let me just go back to that script here. Is it here? Yeah, I have one. It's not a use case, but I think you get the idea. So here I have a script that does, because I'm just preparing a VMware webinar. That's why I'm a little bit into this VMware stuff. So here I have a script that gives me snapshots of a VM. And instead of having that just as a plain text, I want to have it as a result in HTML. And what we have introduced is we have a different way of creating this result message. So result message is kind of the plain text way of presenting stuff. And we also now we have the option of having it's called result HTML. And here I'm calling that based on a function. And I will show you how that works, because that shows us another cool thing we can do here with ScriptRunner. So which happens is now I want to have a snapshot of a particular machine. And what you also, of course, realize is that I don't have to type, for example, the name of VM. Instead, I'm having a query running in the background that will show me the existing VMs in my environment. And so I'm just going to select that. I click on Run. And now again, ScriptRunner executes the script with all the input that I gave here as a user, and it will come back with the result, showing me hopefully the existing snapshots for that particular VM. And so this is just a simple example. You could also have that in of course, it's a HTML file, which you can also then send out to somebody else, or use it maybe for other purposes, posting it to a Teams channel or something like this. So this is something that we changed, so which makes it easier for the user to work with, and which also enables ScriptRunner now to make use of other modules, like creating a Active Directory report based on, I think it's called report HTML module, which then might look like this. It takes a while to run, so maybe we have an example here that we can jump into, so you get the idea here. Did I run it? Here we should have an example. Yeah, which then of course could look like this. That's because we are not just using convert to HTML, but we are facilitating an additional module that you can now use, and also to display here in that user interface. And that's of course something that the user like pretty much, so they can really not just look at plain text, but really having some more, not fancy, but really the way that end users are expecting information to be presented. All right. So in this context, if I'm going back to this example here, we also added some additional multi-language support, which means, as I said, we're taking the information here from the PowerShell script itself. At the moment, we support 2 languages, and they're going to be more in the future. So if I'm switching, for example, here from English to German, you might realize that here the text changes, the description, the title of this action, and also the description here changes. And that's because now, and that's also new since the release this year, you can have additional tags in the parent block, which is at the moment SRDE and SREN. And if somebody switches the language, then we see either the German, in this case, the German text, or the English text. And this functionality is also there for the name of the action and also for the description of the action, which you have over here. So if I'm switching back to English, it shows me that text, and this is the title, and this is the description of the parameter. And if I'm switching to the other language, it shows me another title, another description here, and also another text here. And so that helps us in environment, where this multiple language requirements are playing a important role. All right. So what you might wonder is like, okay, how do I get this drop-down lists here into that configuration? And this brings us to the queries, because if I'm going to the one that we just looked at, going to the edit mode of this action. Again, you see there are multiple actions here, multiple parameters here, so what we saw is, okay, I could select. I think this was not the one. Is that the one? Let me just go back. It was. Okay, so what we see here is that instead of, for example, selecting the name of a VM, I had a drop-down list, and this comes from queries. And so we have the possibility to provide these lists of information to the users, and you control what they're actually able to see. And we have different kinds of queries. So we can have Active Directory queries. You can have static queries where you can just have a list, static list of, for example, templates, maybe for out-of-office notifications, or for these are the allowed Azure regions, and these are the allowed Azure VM sizes that somebody is able to use when they spin up a VM. Or you can have, like in this case, you can have a query script that is getting us the information of the VMs of that particular vSphere server in this case. And that allows us to really to say, okay, the people don't have to type, they can select, and you control what they are able to see. And if we take a look at this example just now, this is a scripted query. Again, we have different kinds of queries that you can create. And so what happens here is that I have a script, which is this one here, that is connecting to my vSphere server and presenting the information that I need. And if I have, for example, in this very especially true for cloud targets, if let's say I have a query where somebody should pick a user from an Azure Active Directory, I don't want to run that query when somebody opens the action, because then they might wait for, I don't know, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, or whatever. What you can do here is that you can say, I want to have a scheduled query. So it already runs every hour in the background, and so the users can consume that immediately once they start this action, and they have the information from maybe 1 hour ago, and they can select from there. That really helps to improve the way the user are interacting with ScriptRunner. The information is there immediately. And what happens, and just to show you that how that actually works, if we go to this example here, and because that shows us another, oh, that's the wrong one. That shows us another way of, what kind of additional information and possibilities ScriptRunner brings into that PowerShell world, so to speak. We have two variables here, the SRX environment variable result list and result list 2. And these two represent, number one, the thing that you display to the user, for example, the name of a VM or the name of an Azure region. And result list represents the technical information that you're actually going to use when the script is executed, which means that you don't have to bother these people with, this is D1 underscore whatever Azure VM. You just say, okay, this is a VM that has 4 cores and 8 gigabytes of RAM, and that's it, for example. And so this is what you can have here with the result list 2 as display information. And the result list is what you're actually using when you execute a script. So we have the right parameters to run that. And with this, you can create all kind of queries for all kind of backend systems. And what you also can do is, which is pretty cool, is you can have a cascading chain of queries. For example, is it this one? Could be this one. Yeah, which could be like, okay, in this case, it's my vSphere server, my VMware host. So I'm selecting that. Now in the second step, it hopefully will show me the existing VMs on that machine. And then in the third step, I'm selecting the snapshot from the machine I've selected. So again, there is no typing involved, and that's one thing. And the other thing is, if maybe somebody is only responsible for a particular host, maybe you would already pre-select one host and then hide that from the input, and then the user can only work on what you decided to, that should be something that the user is able to work with. And so that really helps, again, for the user to work with all that stuff, and for you to say, okay, maybe somebody in helpdesk is only responsible for specific Azure machines or for specific SharePoint sites or whatever. You don't have to change the things in your script, so the scripts are always staying the same, and you're just controlling the behavior based on the queries within ScriptRunner. What I also want to show you is, because we had that example with that list of snapshots, is that I showed you that there was this convert to HTML function being used, and that is part of a library script. So what I have done here is I have my main script that runs whatever is necessary, and then it calls a function. And what I can do here is in the action, I can say, okay, preload. In this case, it's even 2 library scripts that are available right away when we execute the script. So just call that library, that function, and as long as it's part of the library script that I have selected here to be preloaded, it's going to run, and which also means that, of course, that kind of simplifies the way you develop your scripts in the kind of, okay, I have my main script, and if I call a function, I have it in a centralized query script. And if I want to change something or add some additional functions, then I'm doing it in the function script, and I just have to call that here in my action. And I also only have to maintain that function centrally in that single library script. And that really helps, of course, also in the way of maintaining all that, let's say, PowerShell landscape, so to speak. So that's I think it's really a pretty cool thing. Here, by the way, because I said we're supporting, of course, PowerShell 7. So here you can switch between, should that be running on our Windows PowerShell host, or should it run on a PowerShell 7 host, which means we have a self-contained PowerShell 7 that comes with ScriptRunner. So as long as it's just PowerShell 7 on Windows, you don't have to do anything. Obviously, if it's Linux or macOS, we talked about SSH and having this credential and the target being configured, then of course these are the additional steps. And then you can switch your action from Windows PowerShell to PowerShell 7. We already looked at the schedule part of having actions being executed, and that, by the way, let's say if we have housekeeping processes, you might also want to have, of course, actions either being running on a target of a collection of targets, or you can just also say, okay, I have multiple targets where this action should be executed. So this action here doesn't make sense at all, but it gives you the idea that you can have actions that are running on multiple targets. And the third way of using it is making use of the REST API. Which means, so for example, I have a PATG monitoring system running, and I'm allowing the system to talk to ScriptRunner. It has to authenticate, because based on the authentication, we decide if this machine is allowed to trigger an action, because that follows the same delegation as if it would be a user that clicks on a tile to run a script or to execute the execution of a script. And so based on that, generic REST API, every system that is able to talk REST can be enabled to trigger actions in ScriptRunner, which, for example, also can happen. And I think I have an example here. I'm not sure if it works, but we will take a look. And unfortunately, I'm not allowed to switch this interface to English, so sorry for that. So what I have done here is I have a Power Automate, I have a flow that triggers an action in ScriptRunner. So what I have done is I have a gateway, hopefully still running here, Microsoft on-prem gateway. And so what happens here is that if I'm starting this flow, which shows me this. And here now I have to type in something manually. Why take easy words for that. And then I'm starting that. So what happens now? What should happen? Let's see if that's really the case. We should see that now the execution of a new script, something happening here, is triggered via a Power App and this connector, this gateway talking to a web service connector, which is our local loopback web service connector. So getting the information in this case from Power App or from a flow and enable the execution here, which kind of is makes it even more easy for bringing people and user into the whole picture that have no clue that underneath there's some PowerShell stuff going on. Which brings us to the new UI that we are working on at the moment. So as you saw, we have a Delegate app, we have an admin app. In the future, we will have just one single app and with role-based access. So if you're an admin, you can configure things. If you're somebody from helpdesk, you can just execute things, or you might be able to look at statistics. So we add additional functionality here. You will be able to add icons here for this is Azure, this is Exchange, and stuff like that. Which is pretty cool in itself because it's really makes it even easier, and I would say even more fun to work with the stuff. But what it also comes with it is a possibility to take individual actions and make them part of maybe an already existing self-service portal. So something like this. So you might have, so this is just a simple example. So this is just a website where we added the execution of a Azure VM, in this case, to this user who is logged in here. And again, based on the queries, we have decided these are the images, these are the locations that are allowed, and these are the VM sizes that are allowed for this person to use. And then, so now I run that in the background. So again, we should see that now we have the execution of this Azure action being executed in the background. Hopefully we don't see it yet. Maybe I have to refresh. So, and so the idea of that is really to take that possibilities, that whole set of things that you can do with PowerShell, really bringing it, okay, there was an error. Okay, maybe you have to go back to see what happens here. Now, just to show you what happens here and how that's being configured. Now, with the new user interface, each action has a unique ID. And so what I can do is I can take, and here an iframe integration, I can say, okay, I want to integrate this action 158, which is this Azure action. I can configure if I want to display the description, if I can have pre-configured values already in that user interface, again, to make it as easy as possible for the user. And without, again, having to know that there is PowerShell, without having to know that there is ScriptRunner doing something. The people are in their own well-known environment, and you just add the actions that you want some people to be able to use. And so it could be Teams, it could be anything, right? So any action that you want to become part of that can be integrated here. And that really, I think, is a pretty cool thing. That kind of opens up the accessibility to the power of PowerShell to really everyone, basically. All right. I think that is what I wanted to show you guys until for this session. Other questions? Comments?
Yeah, you've answered a few of my questions that I had
Okay.
before, which is great, but I do have some more.
Okay.
So for when you're creating that UI, you were saying that it's based on the doc string of the actual function. So you're creating that overlay. Does it actually scan that doc string in like a specific format, or does it actually look into the param block for things like specific values that you need to set for various parameters? If it works in pipeline, not that one there, but like, is it just the doc string that you're actually passing to build that?
We're looking at the param block. So let's say if you have, and I think we have some examples. For example, I think which I didn't mention, because now we also support regex. So if you have a script that, and I think we have some real simple example here, input validation. So let's say if you have a parameter that comes with a regex, and you run that action, we're on the fly in real time. When you open up that action, we're looking into the param block, and if there is something like there is this regex that forces me to use an @ sign, then I have to do it. Otherwise, I will not. I will have that red circle around that input field. So we're really following all that information in the param block, which also means if there is a date time parameter, we automatically display a date picker here. So, and that's what I meant by, okay, you can control the behavior of the user interface just by the way you build your PowerShell script and your parameters, basically.
Cool. I know that's fantastic. Another question that I had, do you consider supporting other languages? Maybe not for like the actual connection, but being able to sort of work with different languages that are out there. Like on the Linux world, Python is a pretty big one that's happening there.
Not at the moment. So we really see us at the PowerShell management solution. So we get these questions once in a while, also for Python or for other languages. So at the moment, we are really focusing on PowerShell, which of course means if you have something going on in PowerShell that calls other languages, perfectly fine. But the management around, like what we just looked at, credential stuff like that, that's really where we focus on. We are the PowerShell experts or the PowerShell people, so to speak. Which doesn't mean that maybe in the future it's going to change, but for now, for the foreseeable future, I would say it's for us, it's PowerShell, and because we see such a big variety of where the people are with PowerShell. Like you guys, you are, I mean, way ahead of what is possible. I have contact every day with let's say the standard IT administrator, where they're just starting the journey to touch PowerShell, and because they have ScriptRunner, they are not that afraid to touch PowerShell because there are the things around it. So we still see that PowerShell alone, there are so many things still possible, and so many people that should and we try to get into the PowerShell game. That this is, I think, a journey that will go on a long time. But you're right. I mean, there are other languages out there. We're looking at what happens there. But let's say as long as for Microsoft, also PowerShell is I would say let's say a strategic technology for automation. We will be focusing on that.
Okay, no, that's fantastic. It seems like it's a great product that you've got there. Some really awesome sort of UI that you've got there. So I'm pretty happy with that. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for your comments. Yeah, and as I said, so even with the new UI, it will be even more fun to work with, and we're adding things like this also like showing what kind of time people and organizations are really saving by automation things, which is always a good thing if we think about, okay, I have to convince a manager to why automation and why ScriptRunner and PowerShell is a good thing, then always these numbers really, of course, help typically quite a lot.
Yeah, definitely those reports are pretty key
Yeah.
that they're looking for.
Mm.
Like that
Absolutely.
81 that you had there seems pretty in-depth and useful.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So this is something that helps really to also, I think also to, and this is something that I realize also when I talk to people like in the admin world, like with something like ScriptRunner, they can really, it's not just something that they do in their little, let's say, little IT pro corner, because now they can really take that and say, look, we can use that in helpdesk, we can use that for the end users. We don't have to train them how PowerShell works. We don't have any security issues because they don't have to become global admin or whatever. And so this is really something where also the people who work with PowerShell kind of get a different standing in the organization, because it's like, oh, I didn't know that this is all possible, and it's so easy to use. And that is a flavor, and is something that I hear quite a lot when people start using it. Kind of the story that we always hear from Don Jones, like, okay, what happened with when I learned PowerShell? Where got it me to career-wise? And so this is kind of the same thing with what we add on top of PowerShell with ScriptRunner here.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
I'll let other people ask any questions that they have.
Yeah,
I didn't follow the chat. Did we have questions in the chat? I don't know.
Yeah, so there's. I can go through the questions in the chat if you like.
Sure.
Wayne was asking a question whether you can trigger queries to update once you make a change. So a good example is if you update, like let's say you create a new team, and that new team gets reflected within a new the new query.
Yeah. Ooh, that's a good question. I would think that could be something that could be triggered based on this web service local loopback connector, where after the execution of, for example, an action that creates a new team, it already triggers the execution of the query script. Yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting idea, actually. Yeah. It's kind of I have kind of the same questions came across with people when it came to the GitHub synchronization. Let's say if somebody changes the script, the synchronization should happen immediately. Interestingly, the most of the companies and people I talk to were kind of the opposite, saying, okay, we want to control when the update happens. So we know, okay, it's at that time, okay, we are going to kind of, let's say, reload the scripts, and we know now this action with this new parameters, for example, is now being productive, instead of having it like, okay, it's there and now it becomes available immediately. But it would be possible the same way. So I think it really depends how that workflow should look like, and what kind of, let's say, control steps are necessary until some change really becomes, let's say, productive within ScriptRunner.
I think, that it's an interesting question that Wayne asked, like, because that was something that I was thinking about as well. I've also got some questions, but first comment was, wow, it's really good. Like, it's really good, man.
Okay.
Yeah, like I was the one thing that actually the question that I was going to ask, and then you literally answered so many of the questions, which one of them was, can you create custom HTML web pages?
Yeah. So we didn't have it last year when. Yeah. So this was a request that came from many people. So that's why we added it, and it opens up a whole new world of options, basically.
Yeah, and that's 100%. So I do have one question which I did ask last year. So you're probably going to know whether, and this is probably one of the more common questions, is have you added any sort of VS Code support for the add-on? So,
maybe just to give a little bit of reference. So we have this add-on here for the ISE, which I haven't even touched during my presentation, which helps people to kind of have a really basic check-out, check-in functionality when you have multiple people developing scripts. It also helps you to get information about, very good, about this. I mentioned that a few times. This variable, this hash table, actually, which comes with ScriptRunner. And when I have loaded that plugin, it already shows me that information, which, by the way, is quite interesting because that enables you, for example, to have client-side actions where you, let's say, you want to have somebody should be able to clean the local Teams cache because there is no button at the moment to go, and so you would have to go through all these folders and stuff like that. So you can say, have an action, delete the Teams cache, and this, of course, obviously the script runs on ScriptRunner server, uses remoting, and based on that start IP, we know who triggered, from which machine that action got triggered, so we know where we have to go to, and we can take this IP, turn it into the FQDN of the host name and stuff like that. So, so this what we did, and I'm not sure if that was already there last year. What we did do for VS Code is, if we go to the PowerShell gallery, there is and I think we called it SRX environment variable. We are very creative here. Yeah, so we have a module that you can install in your VS Code, which gives you the information about the current status of our hash table. So this is something that we did. So because that's really helpful during the developing and testing that that process. We had a kind of a survey with our existing customer base in June something, where we ask about, are you using that interface? How are you going to use VS Code? And would you still need all that functionality? And the results were like, it didn't seem to be very, very important at this point.
Okay.
So that's why we said, okay, it's good to have this module for VS Code. I'm not sure if we're really going to have that check-out, check-in mechanism in VS Code, because what we see is if people are using VS Code, the possibility that they're also using GitHub for all that stuff in the background is really, really very high. Yeah. So we don't want to do anything that maybe would be nice to have, but not really something that cannot be done with something else, like having the integration with Git.
So ultimately, Git, in a way, so level one is really the checkout, check-in functionality. But realistically, if you're writing code, obviously you should be pushing it into some sort of pipeline, into some sort of repository, and then obviously
source control,
control, and then push to, and then obviously just push. That's really cool. All right, I do have another question. This is actually an interesting question. So you talked a little bit about credentials within ScriptRunner, and obviously to be able to create credentials for different scripts. I'm just curious to find out, is it possible to create, let's say you have a script, and let's say this is a script that connects to a 365 environment, downloads a whole bunch of information about the environment, say like mailbox information, blah, blah, blah. However, from a managed service provider perspective, you probably, let's say you want them to be able to run that script, and you want the user to be able to input a custom credential, one-off credential, let's say to a client's tenant. Is that something that's possible that can be done within ScriptRunner?
So the scenario would be that you would like to allow the user to type in a credential?
Correct.
Is that the scenario?
Yeah.
So typically the credentials, if you look at the user interface here, we typically really try to hide all the information from when it comes to credentials. But let me just go back here into just an example here, because what you of course can do is, and which is kind of something that happens quite often, is that we have scenarios where, of course, you have a script that starts with one credential, but then you need additional ones where you have a PS credential being part of that that step. But here again, and this is something that happens automatically. It's really it becomes hidden. So, but what you can do, let me just see, because we added something. I'm not sure if it's this one. No. There is a option that you can allow a user to switch, not to type manually, but to switch the credential. So, which means if you would have the use case where somebody should really type in something, the only way but it's would not be really a secure way, would be using the secure string, and then you would have a parameter where, okay, you can type in that hidden text here, and then it would be used as a credential. But from a security perspective, that would be, of course, not the best way. Okay. But that is something you could do that with something like this. But what we see, and just because of the scenario that you just described, because we have a number of MSPs being our customer, saying somebody who's working in the help desk of an MSP should be able to switch the action from now I'm working for tenant 1 and now I'm working for tenant 2. That's why switching existing credentials you can enable that, but really typing a new one, the only way I could think of would really take using that, not really that secure way of having a secure string.
I think you pretty much answered. You've answered the question, but I think from future functionality wise, having the ability, especially when you guys integrate with the secrets module, obviously, and having integration with Key Vault, that'll essentially solve that issue, because you can just store your credentials in Key Vault and effectively sync them down. I'm guessing that would be the way that you would kind of get around that. Okay, cool. I have some other questions. I'm just going to kind of read off the chat. Ashok has a question. Does the script run within the ScriptRunner server environment?
Yeah. So we have the ScriptRunner as a service runs as in the context of a local service account, local service. Your targets, of course, can be configured according to what your module might need. We see, I think one example, even is PowerCLI, or there are modules that they kind of need information from a specific user profile. And so what you can do for example, for local execution, you can change the default behavior where we work as impersonated into, for example, a single run mode of a user, for example, or WAS man. So this is the way that you control. For example, we had these scenarios where there's some additional information necessary that if it's running as a local system, we don't have access to it, and then you can switch that in the target configuration.
Yep.
Let me clarify my question.
Yes.
I have a situation within the Office 365 environment, and I want to have the access to the audit log. Okay. Now I go to the Office 365 tenancy, go into the admin module, and within the security artifact, this information is available. Okay, that works fine. I can download that script and download the audit file and bring it into my Power BI environment. That's the way manually it is done. So there is another option of running a PowerShell script. Now running that PowerShell script, it downloads the script, that data onto the CSV file, and that's being sucked into the Power BI, data model. So that is the way it is working. Now the whole thing is the whole process has got to be automated. So now the PowerShell has got to run somewhere. So the solution that I found, I use that PowerShell and run it as a function within the Azure. Then it will connect to the Office 365 tenancy, download the data, push it into somewhere, any repository, and from there I can pick it up my CSV file to refresh the data. Now my question was specific. Now this PowerShell, now it means to say that I have got to have a Azure account to run that, to run that function.
Yeah.
Or I run it locally on my PC or somewhere. And that's the thing which I don't want to do. I want a fully automated, so every day, once in a 24 hours, my script runs, downloads a data file and pushes across to the Power BI model. So my question was this: if this script PowerShell, I have got it, does it run in your server?
The scripts are stored on the ScriptRunner server. The way it's executed really depends on if how we execute or what kind of target we are using. If in this case we would start using the Azure service as a target, then of course you would still have, the execution would trigger it by ScriptRunner locally. We would connect. So what happens is we would have, for example, we'd have the Azure AD or the AC module on the ScriptRunner server. So we are what you just described as the process of running the script, connecting to Azure, and then getting the data from Office 365, download the CSV. That would happen based on starting with, I would think, without knowing all the details, but I would think it will start running against Azure or Azure Active Directory, depending on what how the script works.
You have answered the question.
Okay.
In any situation, still I have got to run my script in the Azure environment. So that does not solve my problem.
Yeah. As you have to kind of get, of course, the connection there. Yeah.
So basically, I was under the impression if I have got my repository of my script within a ScriptRunner, so then you will be running some kind of a VM or something, so that a script will run in that environment and do the job for me, so I can avoid using the Azure function.
I think maybe we could have this discussion afterwards so I could get some more information about what your script actually does in detail to find out what could be.
Very simple script. It connects to the Office 365 environment and uses some get function.
Yeah.
Okay. And just downloads the script. That's it. Downloads the data.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
It sounds like you can run the script on the thing that's running ScriptRunner itself, so you don't need to have a separate host for that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean that's the idea of having all the scripts that you want to run on the ScriptRunner server, which is basically a VM. So, and because ScriptRunner then has the PowerShell host to run all that scripts and with the right targets to connect to Azure or 65, get that data and download it to wherever folder, structure, or Power BI you want to do that. So that's kind of a basic scenario for ScriptRunner actually. So really having one instance that is executing the script, which is ScriptRunner, which gives you all the control and all what I showed you about the dashboard stuff. That's only possible because all the scripts are executed by ScriptRunner, and so that centralization aspect really is key to, I think, to that scenario. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Does anyone else have any other questions that they just quickly want to chime in or just pop in the chat?
Yeah, just last question I have. So instead of scripts, can we use custom modules, which is made by us? And does it also support within the functions? Does it also support validate script? Like I know that you have validate sets and all, which then becomes parameters. But then does it also support validate script?
Yes, it does. And that's possible. And you can also, because I showed the example with, okay, you have some library scripts being preloaded. You could do the same thing with modules. So that's the same way. And just using library scripts, because what I see more often is people going for the library scripts, but it works with the modules exactly the same way.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Alrighty. I think if that's it, let's wait for another couple of seconds. I actually do have another question. Are you able to play Thunderstruck on a ukulele?
Unfortunately, not. That's a good question. Okay. You're referring to our Scripty Boy band? Or...
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Actually, I have to tell you, I'm struggling. One of the bass player came up with a great idea. We want to play All the Small Things by Blink-182, which is a great song. But I immediately found out that the cheat sheet looks like this. It's really like, oh my God. And I'm practicing since last weekend. It's like, you think it's just a simple punk song, but then you look at what Travis Barker is doing. It's like, wow, this is crazy. Yeah. But we're gonna have another rehearsal. Actually, next week on Tuesday, we want to play Highway to Hell. So in regards to the upcoming new AC/DC album, right? On the 13th, I think it's coming up.
Oh,
Can't wait.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. They're still going?
They're still going. Yeah. And they even did, I think the first time they did a 1-hour podcast interview, Angus and Brian Johnson, which was very, very interesting about the how Brian became the singer and all that stuff from back in Black times. It was and there I think that the voice of Brian is I would say almost as good as during the Back in Black times. I think it's something happened to his voice. Yeah, so they're still there, which is great.
Okay, cool. Does anyone else have any other questions? All right, cool. Let's leave it there. Huge thank you. That was really, really good.
Thank you for the possibility.
I'm completely blown away, to be honest. There's so much things that just that you're answering the question that I was just coming up with, like the custom portal and things like that, and you're just completely blown away. And I think we're definitely this is definitely a winner product. Like even just looking at the new UI, I was just completely blown away. I thought it was looking really good. So yeah, well
Thank
done,
you.
guys.
Thank you.
Like that, well done, man. It's just really good. I was really impressed. It's really, really good. All right. Well, anyway, thank you everyone for attending. We might as well wrap it up. I'm going to stop recording now. So yeah, just quickly. Yeah, thank you everyone for attending. And